Hello and welcome to another episode of Agency Leadership Live. I'm your host, Chip Griffin, and it's Friday, so that means it's time for open Q&A. So let's go ahead and jump into the show. So I hope you've all had a really great week and it's been productive and you're looking ahead to the weekend. But before we get to the weekend, it is a time where I get a chance to answer your questions. Some have been submitted in advance, either in the Agency Leadership Slack community, which you can join by going to agencyleadership.com/join. It's free there. You can obviously email me as well, chip@agencyleadership.com. And finally, you can ask your questions right here in the live chat functionality on whatever platform you're watching on, and I'll keep an eye on it and try to bring them into the show. If you've got feedback or your own thoughts on the questions that come up, feel free to share those as well so that everybody can learn from each other during today's session. And of course, if you'd like to get the archive of past shows, Q&As, topical discussions, interviews, the Agency Leadership Podcast, all of the videos that we're putting out, just go to agencyleadership.com/.tv. agencyleadership.com.tv. There we go. And that is where you can get access to all of our past videos. And of course, if you subscribe, you'll be able to be reminded of these future sessions. We go live Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon Eastern Time. So with that, let's go ahead and start diving into today's questions, all right? So let's see. We'll bring up the first question here that I got, and this one came from the Slack community for agency leadership. So, any tips on streamlining a sales process? How do I determine scope before the strategy is approved? And so I know this is on the minds of many of you because you want to get those sales done as quickly as possible. You want to get the revenue in the door. At the same time, you want to make sure that you are getting the scope right, because otherwise you may be committing to something that you can't actually accomplish within the amount of money that you've budgeted, or perhaps you may find that there's a better solution for the client as you move ahead with the conversation. And so this is where I think it's particularly valuable to have a paid discovery component to what you're doing. And so instead of going into a prospect that you're just getting to know and starting out with, let's sell them on a retainer, that's open-ended, or sell them on some really big project, maybe a whole website redesign or a whole marketing campaign or what have you, I instead prefer to see you put together a paid discovery project. And of course, you wouldn't call it that for the client. Instead, what you would do is you would describe it as an audit or a planning process or something with a very defined scope that allows you to begin to work with the client, begin to get to know them. You can feel each other out for how you work, but more importantly, you can understand better what their real challenges are, what they're actually trying to accomplish, and then figure out how you can marry up your expertise and your team's skills in order to deliver it. So if you go with this route, you're looking at something that's maybe, ideally you probably want something roughly in the 10% of an annual budget range for what you think you might be selling them. It's something that is less risky for the prospect to take on, but it is something that also allows you to really get the information that you need in order to scope the real project that you want to do more effectively. Now, this paid discovery needs to be something that can stand on its own. It can't simply be you're paid to write the proposal. It really needs to be something that the client believes they're getting actual value out of. So when I was running an agency, I would frame it in terms of, we'll put together a plan for you that you can implement yourself, we can implement for you, or you could even go to another agency if you wanted. So you want to make sure you're being compensated fairly for what you're creating. Now, the other benefit to paid discovery is that it takes you out of the game where you're giving away tons of strategy and ideas for free during the sales process. Because inevitably, clients want to know what you're going to do and how it's going to help them. They're not going to sit there and just let you say, yes, our retainer is $5,000 or $10,000 a month. It covers our services and we'll figure out what those are later. They want to know specifically what you're going to be doing. And if you don't have a paid discovery component to your sales activities, then you end up giving away a lot for free in those initial conversations. That means it takes a lot of time, and going to the original question here that we had, it's how do you speed up the sales cycle? And the way you speed it up is by getting to that audit or planning process as your first step, rather than feeling like you have to put together a comprehensive proposal that addresses all of the client's needs right out of the gate. And this is also something where clients are right now looking for more targeted, project, results-oriented work from agencies. There's less appetite, at least amongst the agencies I'm talking to, for their clients to sign on to long-term open-ended retainers, the kinds of things that agencies have generally had as their bread and butter. But with all of the uncertainty that surrounds us, political, health, economic, etc., everybody wants to have the maximum amount of flexibility, the maximum or the minimum amount of risk. And so the more that you can do to de-risk a potential engagement with a client, the stronger position you'll be in to get your sales done relatively quickly. Now, other things that you can do to accelerate the sales process that you ought to be thinking about, probably at the top of that list, and it goes right hand in hand with paid discovery, is listen. Don't feel like you need to be giving all of the answers. Don't feel like you need to be talking all the time about yourself and your capabilities and your team and your experiences. Instead, you want the prospect to do as much talking as possible. When Gini, Dietrich and I just recorded an episode about, on the Agency Leadership Podcast, about that first conversation that you have with a prospect. And we believe that it's so important that you spend most of those early conversations in a listening mode. Ask a lot of questions, probe. You will demonstrate your expertise more through those questions than you will by spouting off about all of the great things you've done and all of the great logos that you have in your credentials deck. You want to focus on getting that information because that helps you figure out what are their pain points, what are the client's real objectives. Because clients usually come to agencies and say, I need a website, I need a media campaign, I need help with advertising. But really, you need to dig in and figure out what they're trying to accomplish. Are they trying to build a brand? Are they trying to get direct leads out of this work? Do they have a problem currently in their business that they're trying to overcome? Have they worked with agencies previously and had good or bad experiences that you can learn from? Are there changes internally amongst the way that they're organized and staffed that may help you understand better how you can work with them most effectively? So I guess those would be the two things that I would give this individual as advice on how to speed up the sales process. Listen, 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 and then propose paid discovery so that you can listen some more. All right, let's go ahead and we will jump into the next question. Of course, if you do have questions yourself as you're listening along, feel free to share those in the chat. But let's go to the next one here at the moment. And so this one is, I have a prospect that wants a national PR campaign, but I specialize in local. Is there an alternative to saying no? And I like the way this question is framed because you always want to try to think about whether you're a good fit, but if you're not a good fit, which path do you follow? Do you try to figure out something that might be a fit, or do you move them on and help them find someone who might be able to solve their challenges better? And so as we think about that in the context of this question, if you are an agency that specializes in local or regional campaigns, and there are a lot of agencies out there, I'm sure many of you are listening right now, who have that focus. They're focused on a particular state, region, media market, and that's really where their specialty is. And if your specialty is targeted in that way, then you want to think long and hard before you commit to taking on something that's outside of that scope. You know, if you've listened to me on these sessions or on my podcast, that I believe that you really do need to have a focus, and it's just as important to say no to the wrong clients as it is to say yes to the right ones. And so you want to make sure that you're thinking about that when you're having these conversations. So I love that this agency owner is thinking that way in terms of, this isn't a fit, I don't want to commit to something that's not a fit. But is there an alternative to saying no in this case? And this comes from a coaching conversation that I had, so I have a lot more information behind the core question. But you need to look and take a look at your individual circumstances when you're talking with a prospect and think about, are there things that the prospect could benefit from that you do offer? So if you are this sort of a local targeted regional firm, think about, do they have a need in that area? And in this case, it was a startup company. So would it be possible or prudent even to put together some sort of a base local regional campaign where it's easier to get some of the coverage to set the foundation, to set the table for a more national campaign? It's oftentimes a strategy that startup companies will use, even if they're looking at a national or global effort, ultimately to go out there and make sure that their local newspapers and TV and other publications are covering them first. It gives you, first of all, it gives the team the opportunity to start to hone their media skills, because as we all know, a lot of our clients are not adept at handling media interviews and being good on camera and giving just the right answers when they're talking with print reporters. And so you want to potentially give them the opportunity to get better at it at the local scale, where things are generally more forgiving and where you have that opportunity to build the skill sets up of the internal team at your client. But the other thing that it does is it allows you to establish some credibility by having some media coverage on the client's website, by having things that you can share when you're pitching to other media. So potentially, if you've got a client like this who's taking that national or global look, but they don't yet have the core coverage in their own market where they're headquartered, where they have their employees, where they were founded, then that might be something to consider. Now, you never want to force something like this. So you don't want to come from the perspective of taking your service or your specialty and jamming it in to solve the client's solution. What's the old saying? How does it go? That when you're a carpenter, every solution, I don't know, the hammer and nail thing. I'm blanking on it at the moment. But you understand what I'm talking about. And if you're listening and can remind me of what it is that I was thinking of there, I would greatly appreciate it, because that's the challenge with live, right? Sometimes we just, we can't find the exact analogy that we're looking for. Anyway, so you don't want to do that square peg round hole. You don't want to do it where you're forcing a solution that works for you but maybe doesn't solve the client's problem. But you should think creatively. And honestly, you should be thinking this way anytime a client is coming to you and telling you what their challenge is, what solution they're looking for. This goes back to the first question today. You need to be thinking about how you actually help them achieve their goals. And if you can help them achieve those goals with the services you provide, great. Let them know how you think you can do that. Make the case. On the other hand, if you've gone through this exercise and you say, look, this is not the right solution, they shouldn't have a local or regional campaign first, they really are looking at trade press or national consumer coverage or even global. In that case, if that's not your specialty, then help them find an agency in your network potentially that can help them meet that challenge themselves. You don't want to be promising things that you can't deliver. That will destroy your reputation and it will take your business off track. And I have no doubt that many of you could develop the skills you need to solve a client problem that's adjacent to the services you're offering. Here we're talking about media relations, but it could just as easily be something in the digital space where you have to move into developing mobile apps in addition to websites, for example. Is it a huge bar? No. Could you figure it out and bring in contractors that could help you? Yes. But you're sidetracking yourself. You're distracting your business by doing that. So make sure that you're sticking to your core competencies. Make sure you're sticking to the ideal clients that you've defined, hopefully, and that you're keeping track of so you know who to say yes to and who to say no to. When you do have to say no, do your best to make referrals. It will win you points with that prospect because you were honest enough to say that you were not the right fit. It will win you points with them because you're able to help make some suggestions to how they could solve their challenges. And it also potentially helps you build additional reputation within your industry by partnering up with someone else to let them know this is a client that they might be interested in that might be a good fit for them. So, some things to chew on there. Hopefully that gives you some good ideas of how to handle those situations. And with that, we'll move on to the next question in the mailbag. All right. So this is one that came in, I guess this was a coaching call too. I don't like prospecting. Should I hire someone to help me with sales and marketing? So you're not in an unusual position. A lot of you as agency owners don't like the sales process. You don't like going out there and dialing for dollars. It's not what your specialty is. It's not why you got into the agency game. And that's fine. First of all, most of you don't need to be doing huge numbers of sales anyway. So you do need to be dedicating time to business development. You do need to be having conversations, but it's not like you're selling a software product or widgets where you have to be dialing for dollars all day long. That's not typically what is needed for most agencies to grow effectively and profitably. But you do need to spend some time on sales and marketing. And if you really can't stand it, should you be hiring someone to help you? And obviously, as you know, this show is focused on small agencies, those with 50 or fewer employees. And unless you are a high volume project-based agency, so this is going to be typically more in the digital and creative space, unless that is your specialty, I would argue you do not need, and you probably should not have, a sales-focused individual in your firm. If you are the typical agency that's working off of larger projects and you're looking to sell 5, 10, 15 projects at most over the course of the year, or clients over the course of the year, that's not something that is in general best suited to hiring a sales individual. First of all, when it comes to agency sales in the PR and marketing space in particular, prospects are looking to have a meaningful conversation when they're talking with you. To get someone who has both the sales aptitude as well as the competencies in the services that you're delivering and can have that high-level conversation with the prospect and is willing to come on board as an employee at a reasonable price, because you're small agencies, you're not going to be spending multiple six figures to hire this individual. It's hard to find that person. Typically, if someone has those skill sets, they're more likely to be running their own firm than they are to work for your small agency. So you need to be careful about the idea that you can simply hire someone to fill this role. Now, if you are a high volume agency where you're selling 5 or 10 new projects a month, because that's your focus, you're a volume play, then sales is something that you absolutely are going to need help with. There's no way that you as an owner or an executive are going to have the ability to sell at that volume. So really, whether you hire or not is going to depend largely on the model of the projects that you're selling. What's the value of them? What's the amount of them? And how frequently are you selling them? Now, how can you help yourself when it comes to solving your sales and marketing challenges? First of all, it starts with what I talked about earlier, which is the ideal client definition. You need to have an absolutely airtight definition of who your ideal client is. How big are they? How many employees do they have? What's their revenue? What kinds of titles are you working with in those organizations? What are their challenges? What industries are they in? There are a lot of things that go into defining your ideal client. What stage of life are they? Are they startups? Are they established companies? Are they somewhere in between? Are they brick and mortar? Are they online? There are so many different things that you want to be thinking about when you're defining it. And we're not going to go into a lengthy ideal client conversation today, but ideal clients are all about understanding who you've served before, understanding who's interested in buying what you have to sell, understanding what you're really good at as far as delivering results, and understanding what it is that drives you and motivates you. If you come up with the intersection of those, you'll have a pretty good definition of your ideal client. And knowing your ideal client then allows you to put together a very clear target list. And my experience is that folks who are not particularly comfortable with sales outreach, they're going to benefit from having real structure around the sales process. Honestly, I'm one of those people. I don't particularly enjoy the idea of reaching out for sales directly. And so I have to make sure to keep myself on track by having these processes in place, by having clear target lists of the people that I want to work with. When I work with clients, I often suggest that they put together a nifty 50 list. So 50 targets. That's largely going to be people who might be potential buyers of their services, but it's also going to include people who might refer them for additional work. And if you think about something in manageable terms like that, and you say, okay, I need to reach out to 2 or 3 of those people on my Nifty 50 list every day, that will help you take those basic steps. You can also look at ways to reach out to these individuals in ways other than direct sales, because really what you're looking to do is to start building the relationship, learning about these individuals and their businesses, and understanding if you might have a solution that would help them. So you can do it in multiple ways. For example, I've often used podcast interviews as a way to open the door to a conversation with someone that I want to get to know better, whether that's for direct sales or for some other purpose. You could do it in terms of research. If you are creating a white paper or you're writing for your own agency's blog, those are options as well. There are so many different tools that you can use as excuses to reach out to somebody so that you can start to build that relationship. And if you're uncomfortable with the idea of direct sales, that can be a great solution as well. So bottom line is there are no shortcuts. You can't simply outsource your sales and marketing efforts, but there are ways to help you. There are also, for some of you, the option of using an outsourced lead generation firm. There are plenty of them out there that do a nice job of helping agencies with appointment setting. Make sure you understand very clearly what it is that you're looking to get from them and make sure that they can deliver the numbers that you're looking for and the quality that you're looking for. And it needs to start with that ideal client definition. If you go to a lead generation firm and you don't have an ideal client definition, they're going to be setting appointments with the wrong people for you. So bottom line is make sure that you know who you're trying to reach out to, and there are plenty of solutions available to you that don't mean you have to become a full-time outsourced or a full-time cold call salesperson. That's not what you have to do in order to grow your business. So, all right, let's go to the next question. And obviously, if you've got your own questions, feel free to share them in the chat, and I will try to get to them as well. We've got quite the mailbag this week, so I'll do my best to hit as many as I can before we wind up our time together. This one is, I lost a few recent deals based on price. What should I do to avoid that in the future? And so this is, again, a common concern that folks have, and I did do a show not too long ago on pricing. But when it comes to losing deals based on price, the first question I always have, anytime I have one of my clients come to me and express this concern, hey, I lost deal X because of my price, how should I do better in the future? Should I be charging less? That sort of thing. And the reality is that a lot of times price is simply an excuse for the prospect to avoid an uncomfortable conversation. So the first thing you need to do, if you believe that you're losing sales based on the prices that you're charging, that you're proposing, you need to make sure that that's really what it is. And so you want to probe and understand if the client has, first of all, you want to confirm that they've actually hired another agency. And if you can get them to share with you how far off your price was, that can be helpful. It often gets them talking, and they may at that point say, well, it wasn't just price, it was also that they were willing to do this. Or maybe it wasn't the pricing, but maybe it was the terms. Maybe the other agency came to the table with more short-term project-based work, and you were proposing a longer-term full-on solution. And so it made it a bigger risk, right? Because price is often that proxy for risk that we were talking about earlier in today's show. So dig into that. The other thing to think about here is if they simply tell you after the fact that they selected another agency based on price, but they never followed up with you and they never said, hey, we love what you've proposed. We are absolutely smitten with your work and with your team, but we just can't make that number work. Is there something else that we could do to get to a better place? Well, that's something that you want to explore, because if they haven't asked you that question, then it's a higher likelihood that price, again, was just that shield that they put up so that they wouldn't have to give you their real reason for turning down your agency as their partner. So keep digging. Keep trying to find out what it is that's really going on. But let's, for the moment, assume that it really is price. Let's assume that you are charging substantially more than your competition, and that is why you've lost your last several deals. Well, then you need to ask yourself two questions. the first one is this price that I'm charging fair for the work that I'm doing? And so you need to think about whether you're charging what you're charging because your cost base is too high. Do you have too many fixed costs for your business? Maybe you've got really glamorous offices and a large administrative staff and executive staff and all that, and so everything just has to be apportioned over all of your clients, and so that's eating up too big a piece of what you have to charge to be profitable. Is it that your team is being inefficient? Could you find ways to make your team more efficient so you could have the same profit margin but at a lower price, right? So that's the first question you need to ask: is your price fair? The second question you need to ask, if your price is fair for what you're delivering, are you targeting the right clients? Because chances are, if you are charging a fair price, but the folks that you're talking to, your prospects, are saying you're priced too high, that means you need to think about whether you've defined your ideal client correctly and whether you ought to instead be looking at some other type of organization, whether it's a different size or their needs are different, okay? And if you've figured out that your pricing is fair and you are targeting the right group of people, well, then the problem is likely that you're not conveying enough about what the results are that they will get. What can they see as a benefit from working with you? Because keep in mind, when someone's talking about price, what they're really saying is that what I'm paying you is too much for what I'm getting back. And so you need to help them better understand the what I'm getting back piece. And so that may mean that you need to talk more clearly about what you can deliver in terms of results for coverage or leads or clicks or whatever it is that you are trying to help the client solve as a problem. And so if you can make that relationship between what you're charging and what they're getting more clear, and not what they're getting in terms of the mechanics. Nobody cares that they have a new website or that they have a new landing page or that they have a new ad. They care about the results that are being created by those things. And so if you are making sure that you're creating that relationship between the amount of money they give you and the returns that they're getting, that's how you ultimately solve any pricing problem that you may have. So make sure the price is fair, make sure you're targeting the right people, and if those two answers are yes, then try to make sure that you're figuring out how to best communicate the results that they will get for that investment. All right, let's go ahead and we will jump on to the next question here on the list. And grab a quick sip of water here. I need sales now or my business is in deep trouble. What's the fastest way to jumpstart it? So I know there are agencies out there right now that are hurting. You may be watching this right now because you are concerned about the future of your agency. And I've unfortunately had conversations with a number of agency owners in recent months who are in this exact circumstance. And they're sitting there saying, I've had clients put projects on hold. I've had clients who have had to cancel. I'm working for an industry that's largely shut down or not able to achieve the results that they want to be achieving, so they can't make the investments. So what do you do? So the first thing I have to say here is it's very, very, very difficult. Did I say very enough times? It's very difficult to do things quickly when it comes to agency sales. This is not the kind of thing where you can announce a blue light special and have people showing up. So sales is a long-term play for agencies in general. However, there are things that you can do to accelerate this process. And I would say that the first thing I would look at if I was an agency in that situation where I need to get some traction quickly, I need to generate some revenue quickly, I would look at hyper-focusing my activity. And so I already am preaching the idea of the ideal client. Some may call that niching or niching. I don't care what you call it, but you need to have that focus. You need to zero in on specifically who can you help right now and how can you help them. And what I would do is I would put together essentially a productized service offering, something that really speaks to solving the challenge that you have. So let's take it for instance. If you are a digital agency that works with restaurants, restaurants are having a very difficult time right now. Even those that are in areas where they're able to open, they're opened at reduced capacity. They're having to open up using outdoor facilities in many places that they may not even really have. They're setting up things sort of on the fly. You see these images of New York City where you've got folks setting up sidewalk tables that never had sidewalk tables for their restaurant. And so they're trying to do what they can to make ends meet. So you need to think, okay, if I'm a digital agency, what could I come in and offer to a restaurant as a tightly focused package that would help them get results quicker? And if you do that, that's how you can accelerate some of your sales activity. Now, it's not a panacea. It's not going to solve everything overnight. And you need to make sure that whatever you're putting together as a package is both affordable and also is profitable for you. One of the mistakes I see a lot of agencies make when they're in this situation, and frankly not just agencies, other businesses do it too, is they go out and they try to sell anything they can, thinking that if they're able to generate revenue, they can figure out how to make money off of it later. That's not a good idea. I know that it means bringing checks in the door, and if you're bringing checks or wires hopefully in the door, then you're able to meet payroll. But if you're not able to do it, the work profitably, you're really just digging yourself a much deeper hole over time. And so you need to make sure that whatever you're coming up with as this near-term fix for your business is that tightly focused, profitable work. And if you can do that, you can accelerate the work. First of all, it allows you to speak much more clearly, much more simply to your target market. So instead of the open-ended conversations that you may have typically as an agency with your prospects, where it becomes much more of that feel-it-out process that we were talking about earlier, it's the kind of thing where you're essentially putting together some sort of a tightly focused productized service offering that leaps over the audit and planning piece that we talked about in the first question today, but is still of that same less risky a dollar amount, but more likely to generate immediate returns. So again, that digital agency that's focused on restaurants, maybe it's something that helps them do online ordering more easily. Maybe it's something that brings in the ability for folks to look at their menu online even when they're in the restaurant. I've seen some restaurants, for example, where they'll have a QR code instead of a paper menu, and so customers can use their phone to bring up an online menu on their phone that they can look at. So there's no use of paper menus or plastic menus that need to be cleaned. So that's something that you might be able to go in and offer your target market if you were a digital agency focused on working with restaurants. And it gets the relationship started. It helps them solve an immediate challenge. You need to be thinking about how you can serve the industries that you specialize in right now. If you're in that position where you are that agency that is having a hard time making your numbers and you need immediate traction, focus down as much as possible. Zero in on the real pain points that your clients have. And this is why it's so important to have ideal clients and specialties, because it allows you to become more expert on what the problems are that your ideal clients have and how you can solve them. The more you know, the more effective you can be at jump-starting your sales process when you need to. Now, of course, ultimately, you need to be doing these things all of the time. And if you're focused on simply jump starting, I understand it. It happens. Businesses get whacked by a 2x4, and you have to just run with the situation that you're dealing with. But you need to be thinking about how do you avoid that in the future? How can you put the processes in place? How do you put the structure in place that gives you additional flexibility? And that's probably a good topic for one of the longer shows that I do on a Monday or a Wednesday, where I can talk about how to build in flexibility for your agency business. So I'll have to make a note of that and cover that. So, all right, I think we've got time for, let's try to get in one more question here before we wrap up today. If you have your own question, I'll try to sneak that in at the end too, so go ahead and share that in the live chat if you do have one. When should I raise my retainer price with a client, and what percentage should I use? So for agencies that are retainer based, one of the challenges that you tend to run into is that over time the work becomes less profitable. And it becomes less profitable for a number of different reasons. One of the reasons why it becomes less profitable is because the longer that you're working for a client, the more likely you are to be over-servicing them, because we're people pleasers in the agency space. We tend to say yes when a client asks us, can we do X, Y, or Z? And if that's the case, then you're going to be doing more of it. And once you've said yes to X, Y, or Z once, it becomes harder to say no in the future. Trust me, I've been there. I've ended up doing all sorts of work for clients that I never really intended, simply because they were in a pinch. I agreed to do something in a pinch, and then I've created a new pattern of behavior for the client and for my team. So you need to keep that in mind. So your profitability for clients over time is going to tend to go down for that reason. Retainer-based work also tends to decrease in profitability because your expenses are continuing to go up. The team that you have assigned to that client, they're likely getting raises on a regular basis. Your health insurance costs are going up. Maybe your rent is going up, or other expenses. You're having to upgrade technology to keep pace. There are all sorts of things that you're doing on behalf of the client that your cost base is going to continue to go up over time. And so your retainer, if it stays level, means that your profit margin is now shrinking. So that combination of over-servicing and a rising cost base make it so that retainers are challenging to handle as time goes on, because you're continuing to do the same work for less profit. At the same time, raising prices on a retainer-based client tends to be fairly difficult. And so if you say, okay, I want to put in some sort of an escalator in the contract. That's a common solution that a lot of agencies have. And so they'll put an annual escalator into the contract where it says that every year price will go up 3, 5, 7%, whatever. And so that's one way that you can address it from the get-go. Now, that helps you reduce the diminishing profitability. I guess that's sort of a double negative, but you get the idea. So that can help you. At the same time, it doesn't fully solve the problem, because really, the other thing is most agencies are growing. And so if you want to be a growing agency that's continuing to go to higher revenue and profit levels, and remember, you want to do both revenue and profit. If you're that kind of agency, that typically means that the size client that you had 3 years ago is not the same size client that you have today, and 3 years from now, it'll be different again. And so in order to bring along those old clients, you want to try to get them so that their pricing, their total value is more similar to your new clients. Well, that's very challenging to do by simply going in and saying it's going to cost you 10, 20, 30% more, or even more than that, to get them up to the level that you now have as perhaps your minimum or your ideal engagement. So how do you actually go about getting a client to move up, and what percentages should you be using in escalators or when you go to them to raise their retainer? So a few thoughts here. The first one is, I'm not a big fan of going to someone outside of an escalator and asking for a single-digit percentage increase. Yes, it will help you on the bottom line, but you're then arguing over small potatoes with most of your clients. So that 3% increase, it may help you cover your additional salary costs or insurance costs or those kinds of things. So is it beneficial? Yes, but what you've now done is you've now created an adversarial type discussion with a client, because clients rarely say, oh yeah, I'd love to pay more, right? Even if they know it's fair, they're not eager to have that conversation. So anytime that you're broaching the subject of charging a client more for the same level of service that they've already been getting, that's difficult. If your problem with over-servicing is that, or if your problem is over-servicing, it becomes even a bigger problem, because then the percentages need to change even more substantially. So here's how I like to handle retainer price increases. First of all, test them out on new clients. If you can, with new clients, start charging them at a higher level, you'll be able to prove that this is really where you should be in the marketplace. So raise prices on new clients first. Your risk is a lot lower. You're testing the market, and you're establishing your new market value. Okay, so that's step one. Step two, when you're working with existing clients, don't go to them in terms of increasing their price for a set suite of services. Instead, find a way to reframe the conversation. So sell them something extra, an upsell, if you will, an upgrade to a new level of service or new types of services that perhaps are priced not just more fairly, but maybe you've even got a better profit margin in. So when you look at the client in totality, it starts to get in better shape that way. Okay. The other thing that you can do is to set up a process where you're looking at an annual strategic planning initiative. And so this is a practice that some agencies have. Instead of doing just open-ended retainers, they do a retainer for a year that's tied to a full annual strategic plan. And so if you've got something like that, that gives you the opportunity to come back and have another bite at the apple. And instead of the let it ride indefinitely type of retainer, it's tied into a total campaign. And so you're now sort of somewhere between a hybrid of a large project and a standard retainer. And so if you think about it in those terms, that can often give you the flexibility that you need to make some of the adjustments to price that are necessary. Now, if you've got someone who's on the indefinite retainer, you can still introduce the concept of an annual strategic plan to them and adjust your pricing around that if you can get buy-in on the overall planning process. So think about that as a way to increase your pricing. So don't try to nickel and dime them. Don't go for a 2 or 3% cost of living adjustment as something that you're going to initiate a new conversation about. If you've got it in your standard contract as an escalator, I'm fine with that. I don't think it makes a huge difference because I think the bigger problem is not the cost of living adjustments that you're trying to get, but instead it's the over-servicing and things like that that really are what's eating into your profit margin and are really the reasons that you should be revisiting your retainer. So instead, look for upsells, look for tying pricing to an annual strategic planning process and those sorts of things. And finally, if you are looking to just generally increase your pricing, test it on new prospects first as a less risky way of proving that it will actually work. All right, so I think that's going to bring us to the end of the time that we have available today. I do want to remind you that if you are interested in watching a replay of this or any other episode of Agency Leadership TV, just go to agencyleadership.tv. If you would like to get into the Slack community we have for agency owners and leaders, just go to agencyleadership.com/join. You'll also have access to our private resource library where there are templates and workbooks and sample documents and all that kind of thing that can be beneficial to you as well. If you are interested in asking a question for next week's episode, or if you have topic suggestions for our Monday and Wednesday shows where we take a deeper dive on specific topics for agency leaders, just email me at chip@agencyleadership.com or go to the agencyleadership.com website and use the Ask Chip functionality there. So with that, I really appreciate you taking the time. Henry, thanks for the shout out there. Henry McKemby, good friend of mine, who's got his own business, says, good stuff, Chip Griffin. So thank you very much, Henry. And with that, that will bring to a close this episode. And I look forward to seeing you back here on Monday at noon Eastern for our next show.